Imagine waking up in a medieval village, the usual stench of wet straw and communal goats, only to hear your name shouted by the town crier. But not in the usual way. This time it's followed by 10 silver pennies to whoever brings this man to justice. Now 10 silver pennies might not sound like much, but in the Middle Ages, that's several weeks, wages, a new pair of shoes, and enough ale to make the tavern keeper suspicious of your life choices. Congratulations, there's a bounty on your head, which raises an important question. What now? In a time before passports, surveillance cameras, or even reliable shoe sizes, having a bounty on your head didn't quite mean what it does today. It wasn't so much a high-speed chase as it was a weird popularity contest, where the prize was your capture and mild dismemberment. So, who's coming after you? Everyone. Possibly including your own grandmother. So, you've woken up in your straw-stuffed sleeping corner, and the town criers just named you public enemy number 1, or rather, ye person of notable disrepute. And let's be clear, this isn't Hollywood outlaw glamour. There's no jaunty leather hat, no smirking as you gallop away with a sack of stolen coins. There's just you, barefoot, wearing the same itchy wool tunic for the 3rd month straight, trying to decide if hiding behind the pig pen is a viable long-term strategy. Because in the Middle Ages, a bounty wasn't just a legal matter, it was an invitation to chaos. Let's rewind a little. You probably earned this delightful reward for your capture by doing something both extremely minor and strangely unforgivable. Maybe you stole a loaf of bread, not from the church, mind you, but from the miller's cart, and the miller knows people. Or you failed to pay your tithe. Or worse, insulted a noble's beard. Maybe you accidentally spilled ale on a monk. Doesn't matter. The important thing is, someone rich and connected is annoyed, and you, peasant extraordinaire, are now worth 10 silver coins. For perspective, that's enough to buy a goat, or roughly 4 underwhelming wooden spoons. That's how seriously they're taking your little bread escapade. But don't panic. Yet. You see, unlike in modern bounty hunting fantasies, medieval bounties weren't typically claimed by crossbow-wielding professionals wearing armor and chewing on dramatic catchphrases. Instead, the most dangerous hunter was usually your neighbor, who's been silently resenting your superior turnip harvest for the past 3 years and now sees a divine opportunity for revenge and pocket money. The bounty wouldn't even have your face on it. Literacy rates were appalling, artistic skill even worse. If a poster existed at all, it might show a man with an enormous nose and eyes the size of saucers, and the caption would say something like, Gareth, formerly of Turnip Lane. Wanted for insult, theft, and general uncooperativeness. Last seen smelling faintly of onions. That's it, that's the whole description. So how do people find you? Word of mouth. Suspicion. Guesswork. Possibly that guy at the tavern who claims to just have a feeling. You, meanwhile, have 2 choices. You can run, or you can hide. Or you can try to talk your way out of it, which in medieval Europe means either bribery or excessive groveling. Spoiler, the groveling doesn't always work. But it does make for entertaining local gossip. Running seems like the obvious move. But medieval travel isn't exactly efficient. There are no buses, no maps, and the roads are full of bandits, wolves, and potholes the size of small cottages. And if you're planning to disguise yourself, well, good luck. You own 1 outfit, 2, if you count the sack you sometimes use as a pillow. So you hit the road looking exactly like you, but now sweaty and terrified. Let's talk about what it means to be a wanted person. In a time where no one really knows what you look like, but everyone's more than happy to accuse you just in case. Say you pass through a new village and try to blend in. Within 5 minutes, someone's eyeballing you with the suspicion of a chicken sizing up a hawk. You look familiar, they'll say. You from Norwich? No, you reply. I'm from Notwich. Very convincing. It doesn't help that being a stranger is inherently suspicious in a medieval village. Most people are born, live, and die within a few miles of the same well. So if you show up with unfamiliar boots and a nervous twitch, you may as well wear a sign that says, "Definitely hiding something." Your best chance at survival? Befriend a hermit. Or pretend to be a wandering holy person. Maybe throw in some vague prophecies, speak in riddles, and hope no one asks you to perform miracles. Oh, and if you're really desperate, there's always the woods. Every medieval outlaw story ends up in the woods. You'll find other fugitives there, possibly a man named Lumpy John, and maybe even some ex-monks who accidentally committed heresy. Together you form the least competent gang of survivalists ever to cook a squirrel over a smoky fire and whisper stories of bounty posters like they're bedtime horrors. But don't get too comfortable, because eventually someone will talk. A farmer will mention your new camp. A gossiping washerwoman will recognize your limp. Or Lumpy John will trade your name for a boiled egg. And then the local reeve, basically the medieval sheriff, only more corrupt and with worse shoes, will come knocking. He may bring a few assistants, a priest, and a particularly excitable goat. The hunt is on. You were so close, you almost made it to the next village. You'd even rehearsed a convincing new identity, a humble onion merchant from somewhere farther than here. But alas, the jig is up. Lumpy John betrayed you for a boiled egg and a half-empty bottle of nettle ale. You're dragged from your hidey hole by two grinning villagers who've never had such a productive Tuesday. One of them has a club, the other has a rope. Neither has a strong grasp of personal space. You've officially been caught. Now, modern folks might picture something swift and procedural. Handcuffs, Miranda rights, a stern but polite judge. Not quite. In medieval Europe, being captured doesn't immediately mean you're under arrest, mostly because the legal system was held together with parchment, vague oaths, and a strong belief in celestial justice. Your captors are not officers. They're opportunists. They don't have a warrant. They have rope and enthusiasm. And they're not taking you to a police station. They're dragging you literally to the manor court, which is not a building, it's the Lord's garden, or the front of a church, or just a muddy clearing where the reeve can sit on an upturned barrel and pretend to be important. Once there, you'll likely face the medieval equivalent of a neighborhood watch committee, if the neighborhood was composed entirely of nosy, suspicious people with torches and no sense of proportion. Now begins the trial. Not a trial as you know it, with lawyers and objections and polished wood. No, this is trial peasant edition. The judge? The local lord or his appointed bailiff. Their qualifications? Mostly being rich and literate, which already puts them in the top 1% of the 1%. The jury? That's your neighbors, the ones who once watched you steal extra leeks from the communal garden and have never forgotten it. They don't particularly like you. You, meanwhile, stand there in your muddy tunic, smelling like fear and pig, trying to remember if innocent is even a word in the local dialect. Your crime? Causing trouble, or being suspicious, or stealing a duck. The details are fuzzy, but the duck's owner is in attendance, and she is furious. She claims it clucked its last cluck in your general direction. There's no evidence, no footage, just a lot of pointing, mumbling, and someone swearing they felt a disturbance in the barley. Welcome to justice. If you deny everything, and you will, the court might decide to test your innocence the old-fashioned way, trial by ordeal. Yes, it's as bad as it sounds. They might hand you a glowing hot iron bar and ask you to carry it a few paces. If your hand heals cleanly in a few days, you're innocent. If it blisters like a toasted bread roll, well, that's God's verdict. Or perhaps they'll toss you in a river. If you float, you're guilty. The water has rejected your sinful body. If you sink, innocent, but unfortunately now full of pond. Of course, by the 13th century, the church had begun phasing out these methods, but that didn't stop people from being creative. In some cases, they'd just wait for you to confess. by threatening you with increasingly vivid descriptions of things they were definitely too enthusiastic about, like the rack, or the pear, or being exiled to live among the lepers, which, depending on your current company, might not sound so bad, and if you do confess, it won't be a dramatic speech. It'll be something like, "Fine, yes, I took the duck. It was looking at me funny." And the duck? Still missing. Let's talk punishment. Because here's where the bounty comes in. The person who turned you in, bless their self-interest, now stands eagerly nearby, awaiting payment. If the bounty was officially posted by the Lord, they'll get their coin. Probably. After taxes, and deductions, and a healthy dose of medieval math, which usually ends in, "Actually, it's just this turnip," and a vague promise. If the bounty wasn't official, say, just a wealthy merchant putting a price on your head out of personal grudge, things might get awkward. The Lord could take the money for himself, or decide to fine everyone involved for disrupting the court, because nothing says justice like making it worse for everyone. You, meanwhile, might be fined. Which is hilarious, because you don't have any money. So instead, they'll likely take it out in labor. Or exile you. Or stick you in the stocks for a day or two so everyone can come by, throw stale bread, and yell historically inaccurate insults. If your crime was more serious, say robbery, arson, or just looking like someone who might start a rebellion, things escalate fast. Whipping, branding, forced military service, or in the worst-case scenario, the gallows. Execution wasn't the first resort in many cases, but if the mood was sour, the crops were failing, or the reeve stubbed his toe that morning, well, medieval justice could be brisk and theatrical. They might parade you through town, not as a warning, just because medieval people had limited entertainment, and Wednesdays were otherwise pretty slow. Let's suppose, by divine luck or duck-related technicality, you managed to escape the worst. Maybe the court decided you were too pathetic to punish. Maybe the duck's rightful owner had second thoughts. Maybe you made a compelling case by crying just enough to make the priest uncomfortable. Or, most likely, you ran. Fast. In the confusion while the court clerk fumbled with his scrolls and the reeve argued over duck-related damages, you simply bolted, shoved a wheelbarrow. Duck. Small child. Gone. You're back on the run. But now you're wiser. You've learned things, like never trust Lumpy John, always know where the nearest pig pen is, and that a bounty, once posted, tends to hang around like a bad haircut. You can't just outrun it. Not forever. Eventually, someone somewhere will recognize you, or someone who kind of looks like you, or someone who once knew a man with your face and an unfortunate limp. So you need a new strategy. Reinvention. Here's the challenge. In the Middle Ages, identity was a bit of a loose concept. You didn't have a birth certificate. No one checked your signature. Most people didn't even know their exact age. Documents were rare, expensive, and usually written in Latin by someone who believed punctuation was a tool of the devil. So, in theory, changing your identity wasn't difficult. You just said you were someone else, but the real problem was people. Medieval villages were small. Everyone knew everyone. Not by name necessarily, but by smell, gait, and which side they scratched when nervous. You couldn't fake being local unless you were extremely good at imitating family gossip and also had access to at least one convincing cousin. So instead, you go where strangers are expected. A market town, a place with chaos, commerce, and just enough background noise to hide in plain sight. Now, you'll need a new name, something generic, but trustworthy. William. Always a good bet. There are already 15 Williams in town. Or perhaps Thomas, or John. Not Lumpy John. He's been blacklisted. Just regular John. Bonus points if you can grow a beard and squint thoughtfully. Your backstory? Pilgrim. No one questions a pilgrim. Claim you're walking to see a saint's toenail in Canterbury. People will nod sympathetically and offer bread. Or shoes. A modest job helps. Too flashy, and you'll draw attention. Too lowly, and someone will recognize your peasant hands. Aim for wandering scribe or medieval poet. No one knows what that means, and they'll avoid you out of fear you'll start reciting things. And then, if you're clever, you do something brilliant. You lean into your bounty. You tell people that you were falsely accused, that you're the victim of a cruel lord, a political scapegoat, or a deeply misunderstood duck incident. And in a surprising twist, people believe you. Because in the Middle Ages, everyone kind of hated the authorities. Lords were greedy, priests were nosy. Sheriffs were basically tax collectors, with delusions of grandeur. If you sell your story right, you'll go from wanted criminal to folk hero faster than you can say spurious charges. Especially if you're willing to do small favors for people, like fixing a fence, or teaching their kid to read, assuming you can fake it, or helping someone hide their own suspiciously acquired chicken. You become useful, you gain allies, and before long, someone, probably a chatty widow with 3 cats and excellent gossip radar, starts calling you goodwill. And just like that, you've reinvented yourself. But be careful, because the bounty still exists. And sometimes, bounty hunters did exist too. Sort of. They weren't exactly professionals. More like very enthusiastic amateurs. A man with a sword, a dream, and no sense of proportion. Or worse, a local knight with debts and too many nephews to support. These guys weren't subtle. They'd swagger into town, read the poster upside down, demand to search your pig cart, and accuse at least 3 innocent bystanders of harboring fugitives before getting distracted by the ale. Still, they were dangerous. Because they were backed by the law, such as it was. If one of them catches wind of you, your new identity will be tested. And your beard had better hold up under scrutiny. So you keep your profile low, you nod a lot. Speak little, help old people carry things. Maybe grow herbs and offer remedies that are mostly mashed garlic and confident shrugs. And somewhere along the way, something strange happens. You forget you ever were Gareth of Turnip Lane, wanted for mild duck theft. You've become William the Healer, or John the Quiet One, or Tom the guy who definitely doesn't look like that poster. And life isn't terrible. You were just a peasant, a small-time duck thief, a man whose biggest crime was refusing to tithe on a Wednesday and calling the reeve a sweaty turnip. And yet now you're something else entirely. You've got a reputation. And reputations in the Middle Ages spread like plague in a tavern. It starts small. A whisper here, a rumor there. Someone saw you help an old man fix his fence. Someone else claims you stood up to a corrupt merchant and negotiated a fair price for turnips. A third person, possibly drunk and definitely imaginative, swears they saw you heal a goat with your bare hands and some mint leaves. None of it's true, of course. Well, except the goat. That one really just had a thorn in its hoof. But you've learned a vital lesson about medieval society. Truth is optional, but storytelling is sacred. Soon, your old wanted poster, the one with your face drawn like a sad potato, becomes an object of fascination. Some people think you were wronged by a nobleman. Others say you were a knight who gave up glory to defend peasants. One old woman insists you're actually a disgraced monk fleeing from the Vatican because you knew too much. You don't correct any of them. Why would you? In the Middle Ages, legends were a kind of currency. And in a world where most news was delivered by shouting or embroidered into tapestries, the truth was whatever made for a good fireside tale. So while you blend in by day, humble, helpful, slightly itchy, your alter ego thrives in taverns and marketplaces. You become the man with a price. Now, let's pause to appreciate the medieval storytelling process. There were no newspapers, no press releases, no fact-checking. Just beer, benches, and one loud person with a flair for exaggeration. And that one loud person is now retelling your story. Badly. You listen from the corner of the tavern, sipping your small beer, weak, lukewarm, oddly refreshing, while the storyteller adds new flourishes. You know, he once wrestled a boar bare-handed and won. He tricked a whole company of guards by dressing as a nun. They say he's got a dagger forged by the devil and blessed by Saint Cuthbert. It glows when nobles lie. You don't remember any of these events, but you also don't stop them, because with every retelling your legend grows and your actual name quietly fades. The poster said Gareth, but now they call you the Grey Walker, or the Hooded Fox, or O.L. Gooseblade, which you hope is metaphorical. And, strangely, it helps, because in the Middle Ages, being mysterious is safer than being known. If people fear you or revere you, they stop questioning whether you were ever that sweaty peasant from Turnip Lane. They just assume you've always been this. But here's the twist. Legends attract followers, not real ones. You're not starting a cult, let's be clear. You still sleep under a leaky roof and worry about fleas. But you start collecting people who like the idea of you. Young men who've been unfairly taxed. Women who want someone to stand up to the Lord's steward. Old rebels who never quite gave up the dream of burning something significant. They start asking if they can join your cause. You don't have a cause. You have a goat and a strong desire not to be arrested. But they bring food. They share gossip. One of them even carves you a walking stick with a duck's head on the top. It's both flattering and traumatic. Before long, you've got something resembling a movement, or at least a very small, underfed fan club, and with it, a new kind of power. People come to you with complaints, stories, injustices. You become a walking complaint box. A folk hero therapist with no formal training and a deep mistrust of herbal remedies. You're not entirely sure how this happened. One day, you were hiding behind a cart of onions. The next, someone is calling you Master. You try to protest. They shush you. Master Gooseblade wouldn't be so humble if he weren't so wise. You've accidentally founded a legend. Of course, not everyone's happy. The local reeve has heard the stories. The bounty posters have been replaced with vague warnings. Beware of the outlaw who rallies the poor. The man with the goose staff is not to be trusted. The local priest gives a sermon about pride, rebellion, and suspiciously duck-themed iconography. And the local lord? He wants your head. Not literally. He's far too busy to attend an execution personally. But he sends word. Double the bounty. 20 silver pennies now. That's nearly 2 goats. And suddenly, your legend isn't just a story. It's a threat, which means the bounty hunters get serious. And you'll need to decide what kind of outlaw you really are. The accidental kind? Or the legendary one? The bounty on your head has doubled. Again, it's now 20 silver pennies, a small plot of land, and the Lord's personal blessing to do whatever it takes, which, in medieval terms, is as close as you get to a legally sanctioned manhunt. You are, officially, an outlaw, not just in the romantic Robin Hood movie sense, but in the literal medieval legal sense. You're outside the protection of the law. That's what the word actually meant. Outlawed. No rights, no justice, no appeal. If someone robs you, too bad. If someone kills you, that's not murder, it's pest control. And yet, here you are, alive, and somehow more popular than ever. You've got a small following. A few stray peasants. A nun who left the convent because she found it a bit too quiet. A former tax collector with regrets and a limp. One man who claims he used to be a noble but got better. Together, you live in the forest now, because of course you do. It's the unofficial headquarters of all medieval outlaws. If the woods didn't exist, folk heroes would have to invent them. And you're starting to feel capable. You've organized watches, built shelter, invented a new stew using only turnips, regrets, and something that might be badger meat. Your group is growing, not just in size, but in morale. People like you, which is terrifying. But let's be honest, you didn't plan any of this. You didn't wake up thinking, yes, today I shall challenge feudal authority with a duck staff and vague charisma. And yet, the system sort of forced your hand. Because here's the thing about medieval society. It was deeply unkind to rule breakers, especially if you were poor, loud, or too clever by half. There were rules for nobles, and there were rules for everyone else. And those didn't always overlap. You couldn't appeal, you couldn't vote. You couldn't even complain too loudly without risking a fine, a flogging, or, at best, a deeply passive-aggressive sermon. So when you ran, people noticed. When you survived, people hoped. And when you started helping others, standing up to unjust rents, redistributing mysteriously acquired bread, defending farmers from tax collectors, well, now they believed. Congratulations, you're a symbol. Which means it was only a matter of time before someone made you a target. You see it first in the distance. Smoke. A village, not yours, but one you visited recently, has been burned. Not completely. Just enough to make a point. You learn later that a few of your followers were captured. The nun is missing. The ex-noble is back in chains. You read between the lines. This wasn't just punishment. It was bait. The Lord wants you to come out of hiding. He's hoping your reputation will do what 100 bounty hunters couldn't, lure you straight into the open. And for a moment, you consider it. Marching into the manor, demanding justice, giving a rousing speech with just the right amount of moral superiority. But then you remember, they don't do speeches, they do swords, and fire, and pit traps with spikes made from church pews. So instead, you do what any responsible outlaw would do. You plan. Now, rebellion is a strong word. It conjures images of banners, drums, and very dramatic music. But in the Middle Ages, rebellion often looked like this: sabotaging a lord's grain shipment, smuggling peasants out of debt prisons, redirecting tax carts to accidentally fall into rivers, hiding runaway serfs in root cellars, and occasionally sending anonymous letters to priests that say things like, "God sees your receipts." You become a nuisance, a shadow, a walking headache for the local authorities. And while your group is small, it's nimble. People trust you. They follow your lead, mostly because you seem calm, even when you're not. And you have a rare skill. You listen. You learn their stories. One woman's brother was conscripted and never came home. One boy watched his home taken for unpaid bread taxes. An old man had his leg broken for asking if the mill toll had gone up again. You realize your little rebellion isn't about you anymore. It's about everyone who's ever been too scared to complain. So you keep going. You draw maps on parchment scraps. You teach a farmer how to make smoke signals. You write sermons for the ex-priest that sound holy but contain secret codes. You're not leading a revolution. You're just helping people imagine one. And that might be more dangerous than any sword. One thing about medieval governments, they're slow. Not just because messengers ride on horseback, or because everything is written by candlelight in suspicious Latin, but because rulers, frankly, have a lot of other things to worry about. Plagues, border wars, a bishop who won't stop building fountains, a cousin who's suing them over sheep. But eventually, inevitably, someone at court hears your name. Not your real name, of course. That's long lost to the straw mists of history. What reaches the royal ear is your legend, a whisper in the hallways of a castle, a report from a tax collector who returned empty-handed, a mildly exasperated letter from a bishop warning of a, quote, local spiritual anarchist who may or may not be organizing sermons with subversive poultry. And then comes the question from someone important, likely while picking at a roasted quail and ignoring a very expensive map. Who, they ask, is this goose blade. The room goes quiet, because no one really knows, and that makes it worse. Now, under normal circumstances, your little uprising wouldn't merit attention. Local revolts happened. Villagers threw rocks, stormed a bakery, got arrested. The end. But you've lasted months, you're gaining support, and worst of all, you've become a symbol. Not for nobles, not for clergy, but for everyone else. The ones who harvest, scrub, stitch, and starve. The ones who usually stay quiet but now aren't. Which is why a royal advisor somewhere leans over a scroll, raises a deeply skeptical eyebrow, and writes a new order. A discreet one. Because this isn't about punishing a criminal anymore, it's about containing an idea. So how does a crown deal with an outlaw it can't find? It sends someone who can. Enter the royal fixer, no name, no title. Just an emissary with fine boots, a sword that's never dull, and a talent for problem-solving that rarely involves conversation. They arrive at the local lord's manor without fanfare, ask no questions. Just present a sealed letter with an impressive wax seal and an even more impressive list of authorizations. The local reeve is nervous. The bailiff tries to look busy. The steward has already locked the pantry. You've become a threat to national order. Which is impressive, considering you started this journey hiding in a pig pen. But here's the twist. The royal fixer? He's not entirely sure you're the villain. He's heard the stories. That you steal from the rich, yes, but mostly to give to the poor. That you burned a tax record book to save a village. That you once healed a sick child with nettles and sarcasm. Even among the nobles there's debate. One camp thinks you're a danger to the throne. The other thinks you're a useful distraction, someone they can blame for other problems. Someone to absorb discontent like a very articulate sponge. But neither group wants you free. So the bounty goes up again. 50 silver coins, enough to buy a cow, a cottage, and possibly the affections of your local alewife. And this time, they include a description. Brown hair, medium height, possibly bearded, wears a cloak, smells like mint. So basically, everyone in medieval England, back in your camp, you don't know any of this yet. You're focused on bigger things, like teaching your followers how to forge travel permits, translating rude poems into secret messages, digging storage pits to hide food from winter and from tax collectors. But slowly, you notice a change. The woods feel quieter. Villagers visit less often, or only at night. A boy brings you bread and whispers that men in fine boots have been asking questions in town. A shepherdess says she saw a stranger sketching something in a notebook. Your camp, maybe. The danger isn't just growing, it's organizing. And yet, despite all this, you feel calm because you're not hiding anymore. Not really. You've accepted who you are. Not a peasant, not a thief, not even a man with a silly nickname and an unfortunate duck-based branding issue. You are a storyteller now. A leader. A walking version of everything they were told they couldn't be. And somewhere deep in the woods, someone's writing your next chapter. They say winter is coming. In medieval Europe, that's less of a poetic metaphor and more of a warning from your joints. It means mud becomes ice, bread becomes stone, and everything that can freeze will. But this year, the cold is different, not just in the air, but in the way people look at you. Nervous, hopeful, tired. Because the royal bounty posters aren't just in towns anymore. They've made it into the woods. Parchment, nailed to trees. Crude sketches drawn by someone who clearly has never seen your face but insists on giving you suspiciously villainous eyebrows. Wanted, the outlaw known as Gooseblade. Your name, or rather your legend, now travels faster than you do, which is flattering, and also a problem. The royal fixer is still out there, watching, waiting. He's clever, too clever. He hasn't sent soldiers into the woods, no torches, no cavalry charges. He's cutting off your support instead. Convincing villagers that helping you is too dangerous. Pressuring priests to give sermons about loyalty. Bribing informants with food, salt, promises of immunity. He's not chasing you, he's erasing you. And it's working. Your group is shrinking. Some followers leave in the night, not because they've lost faith, but because they have families, crops, winter debts, the kind of things no legend can protect. You don't blame them, but you do start to worry. One night, huddled around the fire with the few who remain, a boy with a slingshot, a widow who bakes excellent bread, a half-blind man who once claimed to be a knight, you ask the question, what are we still doing here? Not angrily, not dramatically, just tired. And they answer, quietly, not in speeches but in fragments. Because I want my daughter to grow up knowing someone said no. Because if I leave, who keeps the goat from freezing? Because you stayed. It's not much, but it's everything. So you change your strategy. No more hiding. You start walking into villages again. Not to fight, not to burn, but to talk. Yes, you're wanted. Yes, your face is on every door. But you're still just you. You help fix a roof. You carry a barrel for an old man. You listen to a grieving mother talk about her son who disappeared into a debtor's prison and never came back. And people see you. Not the legend, not the outlaw, but the person. And sometimes they still turn you in. Other times they don't, because you're no longer outside the law. You're beside it. The other option, the what if. You've become a question the crown doesn't want people asking. Then, one morning, it happens. You walk into a village to find silence. No guards, no reeve, just the royal fixer, sitting on a bench, waiting. He doesn't draw a sword. He doesn't call for archers. He just nods, as if he expected this moment all along. You've made quite the mess, he says, not angrily, almost impressed. And you answer honestly, it was never the plan. He leans back. I believe you, but now everyone else believes in you. And that's more dangerous than anything you've stolen. You sit, because why not? The sun rises. The village chickens pretend not to eavesdrop. And you talk, not as enemies, not as hero and villain, just as two tired people trying to explain how things got this strange. You tell him about the duck. He chuckles. He tells you about the politics, the pressure, the fear from above. He doesn't agree with you, but he understands you. And when you stand to leave, he doesn't stop you. Not yet. The next few weeks are quieter. Villages return to routine. The bounty posters begin to fade from rain and neglect. You visit fewer camps, say fewer words, because you've realized the rebellion doesn't need you anymore. Not as a leader, not as a face, because the idea, the possibility, is already out there. And ideas in medieval Europe are the one thing no one can outlaw. Years pass. Or maybe only months. Time, in the Middle Ages, is slippery. There are no calendars for most people. Just harvests, moons, feast days. In that one week where it rained so much the pigs tried to move in with the priest. And somewhere along that timeline, you disappear. Not vanish, not die, just fade. No one quite remembers when they last saw you. One day, someone mentions Gooseblade while repairing a fence. The next, they wonder, is he still around? And then, did he ever really exist? Because that's the curious thing about legends. They grow, then drift, then settle like dust on the beams of an old inn. The bounty poster is still there, torn, faded, scribbled on by a child who thought your beard looked funnier with flowers. The ink is run, the parchment curls, but it remains, a relic. Sometimes the reeve points at it during sermons, sometimes he doesn't. The new steward thinks Gooseblade was a made-up story, a medieval cautionary tale about ducks and disobedience. Meanwhile, life continues. The fields are planted. The ale is brewed. Children play pretend, wrapping sacks around their shoulders, galloping on broomsticks, shouting things like, "Justice for the people!" and "Hands off my turnips!" No one stops them. A few parents smile. One old man, probably your former blind companion, calls it a good game. Somewhere, maybe in the next shire, a stranger helps fix a roof. He doesn't talk much, but he listens, and when he leaves, the family finds a pouch of herbs tied to the door, a remedy for cough or sadness or both. They don't know his name, but they tell the story anyway. Later it changes, becomes more dramatic, more poetic. Eventually someone adds a sword, then a horse, then, somehow, a dragon. Because that's how legends survive. Not in truth, but in retelling. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was. You're still out there, probably, somewhere between a footpath and a forest, living quietly, helping now and then, never staying too long. You don't need recognition. You don't need coins. You don't even need revenge. Not anymore. Because your story did what no sword ever could. It opened a door. It reminded people that the rules aren't always right, that kindness is a weapon, and that sometimes the best way to change the world is simply to refuse to vanish when told. So rest easy, Gooseblade. Your work is done. You are now a bedtime story. And that's the greatest legacy of all. Sometimes, when people whisper your name now, it's not out of fear or fame. It's out of ritual. Because you've become something else entirely. A ghost. No, not the spooky, chain-rattling kind. Although in some villages they do claim your spirit appears on misty mornings, pointing dramatically at unpaid taxes. Rather, you've become what medieval people call a presence, a symbol that drifts through stories, sermons, and dreams. A walking idea. And ideas, in medieval Europe, are a little like saints. They get their own legends. It starts with the Green Chapel. A ruin, really. Moss-covered stones where once a noble chapel stood, built by a knight who swore an oath of silence, then promptly disappeared. You stop there one evening, just for shelter. You build a small fire, patch a hole in the roof with old thatch, fix a broken bench for no real reason except that it wobbled. Then you move on. But days later, someone else finds the place. A shepherd, then a traveler, then a widow with no home and 2 goats named Regret and Nuisance. They see the fire pit, the repaired bench, the faint outline of a duck carved into a fallen stone, and they say, "He was here." And that's all it takes. The legend grows. Soon, people begin to leave offerings. A scrap of bread, a bit of cheese, a small carving of a goose wearing a crown. No one guards the chapel. No one claims ownership. But it becomes a place of quiet rebellion, a refuge, a sanctuary for the tired, the hunted, the questioners. They call it Gooseblade's Chapel. You never return, but the story lives on. Elsewhere, a group of traveling musicians adds your tale to their performances. They sing of the outlaw king, the man with the mint scent, the knight of the low table. Their ballads are wildly inaccurate. You are at various times 10 feet tall, a lost prince, blessed by a hedge witch, in possession of a duck that lays golden eggs. The last one gets particularly popular. Children love it, nobles less so. One baron tries to ban the song, so naturally it becomes the most requested tune in every tavern from here to the coast. You're not sure whether to be flattered or concerned. Possibly both. Meanwhile, other outlaws begin using your name, not out of deceit, out of reverence. They leave small carvings behind, tie mint sprigs to tree branches, sign their notes with a feather. Sometimes they help people, sometimes they don't. You have no control over it. But you realize something important. The name doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the people, to the story. And while you still walk among them, quietly, unrecognized, just another bearded figure with too many opinions about thatching, your name is now a tool, a spell, a soft rebellion spoken over bread and bonfires. And somewhere, deep in the royal court, a young scribe copies a new report. Local unrest increasing. Villagers referring to unknown figure as protector. Chapel in woods now known gathering site. Recommend increased surveillance. Possibility of spiritual movement developing around this gooseblade. The report is filed, ignored, buried under more pressing issues. Famine, rain, the bishop's gout. But history, as always, forgets the footnotes and remembers the goose. In the Middle Ages, most people never left their village, or their shire, or even their field if their family was particularly possessive about turnip rows. But stories? Stories had no borders. They traveled, with pilgrims, traders, minstrels, and anyone with a spare ear and a suspicious loaf of bread. So one day, a tanner from your homeland wanders across the channel, probably fleeing taxes or marriage, and ends up in a dusty French tavern trying to trade goatskin for beer. He tells a story, not a new one, just an old favorite to pass the time. It begins as they all do. There once was a man named Gooseblade. At first, the locals laugh. A man with a duck staff? Who smells of mint and preaches justice? Ridiculous. But the tale sticks, because things in France, like in every kingdom, are not exactly going well. The taxes are high, the roads are worse, and the nobles, in their towers and silks, are developing a worrying taste for gold toilets and diamond-crusted bread. Slight exaggeration, but not much. So when a story comes along about a man who defied power with charm, who helped the poor, who never demanded anything except fairness, people start to listen. And just like that, Gooseblade goes international. Soon, songs appear in Breton. Woodcuts show a tall figure in a hood, standing on a hilltop, holding a goose like a torch. Local tales adapt. In some versions, Gooseblade is French. In others, a woman in disguise. In a particularly dramatic Flemish poem, you are a time-traveling monk from the future, sent to teach virtue through interpretive dance. The details are flexible, but the core remains. Someone who saw injustice and didn't look away. And that's dangerous. Because now it's not just England that's nervous. French lords start asking uncomfortable questions. Why are my peasants chanting about feathers? Why are the children naming their goats, Blady? Who keeps drawing duck graffiti on my grain house? And just like that, your legend becomes a diplomatic concern. Back in your forest, the original one, you're none the wiser. You're helping a miller build a new wheel, trying to stop two of your younger followers from turning your camp into a wrestling arena, and occasionally roasting root vegetables with all the culinary enthusiasm of a damp monk. But something feels different. Visitors start coming from farther away. A woman from Brittany, a man with an accent no one can place, a boy with a carved charm, and a story about the Chapel of the Feather. They all say the same thing. I came to see if it was true. You never say yes, but you also don't say no. Instead, you offer them a seat by the fire. And of course, as legends spread, so does fear. The crown, already irritated by your stubborn continued existence, now sees a bigger problem. Because Gooseblade is no longer just a nuisance, you're a movement. A soft-spoken, misquoted, goose-themed movement that's slipping across borders and into the dreams of people who were never supposed to believe in anything but taxes and silence. So the response escalates. Royal messengers are sent to other courts with warnings. Advisors begin drafting plans, subtle, expensive, secret. And somewhere, someone proposes the unthinkable. What if we made a deal? Because the truth is, not everyone in power wants to destroy Gooseblade. Some want to use you, or buy your loyalty, or turn your image into a royal mascot. Defanged, domesticated, printed on official tax forms next to slogans like justice through proper record-keeping. But others still believe in the sword, and as rumors swirl and kings mutter over maps, one thing becomes clear. You're not just a local myth anymore. You're a continental problem. And no one knows how to stop a ghost, especially one made of feathers, songs, and inconvenient hope. As the bounty on your head continues to echo from village to village, the story evolves. What began as a whispered warning is now a roaring anthem. 10 silver pennies, that's the prize. But the cost? That's a little more abstract. It's not just about being captured. It's about what your capture means in a feudal society obsessed with law, loyalty, and spectacle. The political tide turns when you reach the edge of Count Lothair's domain. A borderland of dense woods and paranoid locals, it is a county where rumors travel faster than birds, and the word justice often wears a different face depending on who says it. Lothair himself is known for his obsession with order and his love of coins. In other words, the worst possible place for someone with a bounty on their head. The lawman. You're not 2 steps past the county's border before you're greeted by a lawman in boiled leather armor, his chest puffed up with purpose. "You there," he shouts from the road as you round a bend, a crossbow slung across his back. "Name and business." You lie, of course. Instinctively. You name yourself Tybalt, a humble stonemason in search of work. But it's too late. The look in his eyes says it all. He recognizes your face from the crude sketch nailed to the gatehouse in the last town. Your bounty, it seems, has caught up with you. But here's the thing about bounty laws in the Middle Ages. They're flexible. There's no standardized system of law enforcement across kingdoms. One county's outlaw is another's tax collector. In some villages, a bounty makes you a criminal. In others, it just makes you valuable. So the lawman does what any enterprising servant of justice might do. He invites you to dinner, not with food, with chains. A trial of sorts. They drag you to the nearest castle, where Count Lothair's steward holds court in a stone hall that smells of old blood and wet wool. You're not tried by a jury. That's a luxury for nobles and bishops. Instead, justice here is personal. The steward doesn't ask whether you're guilty. He asks whether you're useful. "Can you write?" he asks. You nod. "Can you tally sheep?" You nod again. "Can you read Latin?" You lie. The steward leans forward. "Good," he says. "Then we'll let the count decide what to do with you." A noble's bargain. Here's where it gets strange. In this fractured world of loyalty oaths and shifting feudal obligations, a noble like Count Lothair sees a wanted man not as a danger, but as a potential asset. If he harbors you, hides you, uses you as a clerk, a spy, or a scapegoat, he gains leverage. If he turns you in, he gains money. 10 silver pennies. Enough to feed a household for a season. Enough to buy half a pig. Enough to earn the gratitude of your enemies. And if your bounty were higher, say 10 gold coins, the decision might already be made. But silver is a whisper. Gold is a scream. So the count takes his time. You are kept in a storeroom turned holding cell, given crusty bread and water so brown it could be soup, and left to wait for your fate. The spy, during the days, you watch servants move in and out. One of them, a girl with a twisted braid and clever eyes, smuggles you extra food. At first you think it's kindness. Later you learn it's investment. "My uncle was hanged for less than what you're accused of," she tells you in a whisper one night. The crowd cheered. They cheered. And then they went back to their pottage. You ask her why she's helping you. She shrugs. "Because I want to see what happens when you get out. Not if. When." There's a strange hope in that. In a world where the average peasant is born and dies within 5 miles of their front door, you are a story in motion. And that makes you dangerous. The escape. One night, during the second sleep, that quiet medieval limbo between dusk and dawn, you're awoken by a soft thud. The braid girl stands in the doorway, holding a key and a rope. Behind her, a guard slumps unconscious, reeking of herbs and vinegar. "I told you I wanted to see what happens," she says. "You don't ask questions. You just run." On the move again, the woods of Lothair's lands are black with fog. Wolves cry in the distance, and the trees are full of broken branches that reach like accusing fingers. You travel by moonlight, guided by instinct, fear, and the occasional whispered prayer. At the edge of the woods, a crossroad looms. South lies the trade routes, east, the mountains, west, a monastery, and north lies the King's Road and rumors of someone powerful enough to buy your pardon or maybe turn your name into legend. You pause, heartbeat echoing in your ears. Somewhere in the dark, a bounty hunter might be sharpening his knife. A peasant might be dreaming of silver. A lord might be weighing your name against the promise of political favor. But for now, you're still free. So what happens if there's a bounty on your head in the Middle Ages? Well, in theory, you get caught, tried, punished, reward paid, system satisfied. But in practice, you live, you run, you adapt, you invent new names, new loyalties, and new reasons to wake up in the morning. You learn how to tie knots and read silences. You get very good at listening to hooves before they round the bend. You're feared, then famous, then forgotten, then something more powerful than all three, remembered. Not as a criminal, not even as a hero, but as a story. Because a bounty, in those times, wasn't just a price on your head. It was a claim on your soul. It told the world, this person does not belong to the law. But when the law is broken, twisted, or owned by those who already have everything, stepping outside of it might be the first honest thing you've ever done. And so, over time, your face fades from wanted posters. But your mark doesn't. It shows up in legends told beside fires, in chalked symbols on village doors, in the way a stranger tips his hood and a child whispers, "That's him." Maybe it isn't. Maybe it never was, but that doesn't matter. Because the idea remains, and in the end, that's the real legacy of a man with a bounty on his head. Not the crime, not the capture, not even the coin, but the reminder, to everyone still living under boots and banners and burdens, that once someone said no and lived to keep walking.